system really broken, and that will be with Karen Washington, led by leader Joe Chuman, in a discussion. I'll start with Dr. Chuman first. We all know Dr. Chuman, if you remember. He's been the leader of the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County, New Jersey, since 1974, and since 2008 has served as a part-time leader of the New York Society for Ethical Culture. As an activist, Dr. Chuman has worked on behalf of human rights, civil liberties, and in the opposition of the death penalty, as well as many other progressive causes. Dr. Chuman teaches human rights at the graduate level at Columbia University and is taught at the United Nations University for Peace in San Jose, Costa Rica. He is a writer, and what we have also enjoyed, and he's willing to do again today, is a brilliant moderator and a thoughtful discussion leader. So, that is Joe Chuman. Our speaker today is Karen Washington. She is a farmer and an activist. She is a co-owner of Farmer at Rise and Root Farm in Chester, New York. She's an activist, food advocate, and in 2010 co-founded the Black Urban Growers, or BUGS, an organization supporting growers in both urban and rural settings. In 2012, Ebony magazine voted her one of their 100 most influential African Americans in the country. And in 2014, was the recipient of the James Beard Leadership Award. Karen serves on the boards of the New York Botanical Gardens, Why Hunger, Just Food, and Farm School NYC. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to Karen Washington.
Stole my thunder. I thought I was going to do the introduction. That's quite all right. There's a lot more we could say, including that Karen Washington did make a trip to Washington to meet with Michelle Obama, and there's an overlap of interests in terms of gardening, so I was really very interested in knowing what the conversation was that they had with each other. The title is The Food System Really Broken? And we're really going to be talking more about its repair, I think, and implicitly about its brokenness, so that we can talk about that as well. A lot more. Did you mention Karen Washington's membership on the New York Botanical Gardens? Well, you did mention that. Okay, very good. Yeah, everybody here knows the Botanical Gardens. I should say, the New York Society has a strong interest in environmental concerns, but I suspect most of our environmentalists don't really commune with the environment in terms of getting their hands in the soil very much, and our guest today does. Her environmentalism takes many forms, both very visceral as well as involving questions of justice, which we're going to get into. But first, my first question for you, may I call you Karen? Or
yeah.
Okay, Karen, right?
That's my name.
That's your name, right? My first question is very personal. I've read a little bit about your biography, and you do not come from an agricultural background or an agricultural family. You come from New York City. And I'm sort of curious, what inspired your interest to get started in community, in backyard community gardening in the Bronx? I mean, what was it that actually motivated you? What was the spark?
Yes, so I've been telling this story for so long because my parents weren't farmers, my grandparents weren't farmers at all, and it wasn't until I moved to the Bronx in 1985 and I bought a brand new house, and I had three options. Either I was going to cement it, put grass on it for lawn, or grow food, and I decided I wanted to grow food. Now, back then in 1985, the internet was in infancy,
right.
So I had to rely on the library. I bought books at a bookstore, and then speaking to some of the neighbors about growing food. I knew from a child that you put seed, put a seed in the ground, and you put some, you don't call it dirt, but back then you call it dirt. I know it's soil, and water, and sunlight, and nurture it, and something will grow. And so there were four things that I wanted to grow. I wanted to grow eggplant because it sounds funky, and eggplant was weird. I wanted to grow peppers because I love peppers. Had to grow collard greens because collard greens was part of my African American culture, and I decided I wanted to grow tomatoes because I hated tomatoes. And it was the tomato that changed my world, because Prior to that, tomato came from a grocery store, came 3 in a pack. It wasn't red, it was pinkish, and it had no taste. It tastes like cardboard.
That's right.
So when I grew this tomato, first of all, it grew on a vine. My relationship was it was always in a store. So the fact that it grew on a vine, that's number one. The fact that it was red and that pink. And then when I bit into it, it just changed my world. The taste, the juices was running down my arm. I'm licking and I'm saying, what the heck is this? This is some sort of fruit. It was a taste that I can't really describe, but it felt nourishing to my body. And once I started doing, I got hooked. And then I went to grow everything from pineapples and bananas, you name it, and realized I couldn't do that. But I think it just, inside me, something clicked.
That's beautiful, yeah. Well, most people know I come from New Jersey, and New Jersey's a garden state, and I have a backyard garden, and I grow tomatoes, and New Jersey actually produces very good tomatoes. Rutgers tomatoes and so forth. Very good. I think they produce good tomatoes. Anyway, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, you haven't had a tomato unless you've had one that is grown locally. But this is a good way. Let's use the tomato as a way in to get into the larger issues of the food system, and then into questions of food justice that I want to talk to you about, as well as your actual activity, what you do. The title for the address is the food system. Is the food system really broken? What do we mean, or what would you mean if you use the term like the food system? What is the food system?
Yeah, so from time to time again, being a person of color, living in a low-income neighborhood, surrounded by fast food, junk food, and processed food, we were told time and time again, the food system is broken because, let's face it, we live in the United States of America, one of the greatest countries in the world. And the question that I ask time and time again, why is there hunger and poverty? Right? Why is there hunger and poverty? And so, I put that out there because when it says it's supposed to be broken, for me, at one time I was drinking the Kool-Aid and I used to believe it. But now, because I live in a low-income neighborhood and I see the food that's in my neighborhood, it's based on a caste system. A caste system based on race, based on economics, based on demographic. And I say that because when you look at the food system, the healthy, good food is in mostly wealthy neighborhoods. The cheap, unhealthy food are in poor neighborhoods. And so for me, it's not about all of a sudden people just saying, oh, the food system, we know where healthy food is going and we know where unhealthy food is going. So when people say it needs to be fixed, no, it's doing exactly what it's intended to do, to split the dynamics of the food into wealthy neighborhoods and into poor neighborhoods. Wealthy, good food, poor neighborhoods, cheap food. It doesn't take a rocket science to see that. My aim is what are we going to do about it?
Well, let me then ask you the question. A mainstay, or where you get started, is in having neighborhood community gardens. How does that movement, creating small plots, community gardens that are maintained, cultivated by people in the community, I assume for their local consumption, how does that both symbolically and in fact address the type of caste system that you're talking about that describes the food system? What's your intent with regard to changing it and using the community garden model to do that?
So let me give you a little history of these community gardens. How many of you have participated or seen community gardens? Okay, I love it. All right, so let me give you a little history. Sharon can attest to that because we go way back, Sharon. Do we go way back? We see our gray hair? We go way back. Because this, at one time, believe it or not, if you can think, at one time, New York City alone had over 1,500 vacant lots, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. They were undergoing a fiscal crisis. This was being seen not only in New York, but in most cities throughout the country. Cities were broke, they didn't have any money, and so they left these empty lots. Those that had money and privilege, they call it white flight, moved to the suburbs. And in the Bronx, it was a big sort of development called Co-op City. And so many people were leaving the Bronx, where I live, and going into the suburbs or going upstate. And so what was left behind were these empty lots in mostly poor communities and communities of color. And so the only choice that these people had to do was to fight and take back this plot of land. And so when we talk about the community garden movement, at first it wasn't about food. It really was about taking back a part of something that from time to time again, garbage filled, full of drugs, you name it. And so it, now I know it's definitely environmental racism. But back then, it's like getting people all of a sudden, we had no hope, were in despair, to come together and clean out these empty lots, throw in some seeds and some shrubs, and to make it beautiful. And so the first thing wasn't about, it was about beautification. And then all of a sudden, it started, the complexion of the neighborhood started to change. Also, how people felt about themselves started to change. Now, you think you're doing the city something good because you're doing something that the city doesn't have to put any resources in. And you have these communities coming together, taking out the garbage, planting seeds and flowers and shrubs and trees, and making all of a sudden their communities beautiful. Until 1998, when then Giuliani started to auction off 100 community gardens, bulldoze a couple in there tonight. Now, back then it was horrifying. Now in retrospect, it was the best thing. Because any movement suffers from silence and complacency. And back then, we were complacent. We were silent. We were doing the city, a good job. We were taking care of the gardens. They didn't have to pay for a worker to take care of the gardens because they had the community taking care of the gardens. They had a community who were combating the drug dealers and the drugs and the prostitution. They had a community holding down the fort. However, his intention was to start selling them to the highest bidders, to the developers. And then all of a sudden, that activism started. Because all of a sudden, people who were complacent and silent had to learn the political system. A one-on-one civic lesson. And we had this thing called Plant to Vote. First of all, getting people to register to vote. Understanding where their power was. Looking at the community board. Looking at city council. Looking at your assembly, your senator, your congressman, all the way up to the mayor. And then all of a sudden coming together because, again, you can't do this movement in isolation. And so what the mayor tried to do was pit housing against gardens. Look at these gardens. They don't want you to have affordable housing, which someone can just define to me what affordable housing is. I'm still trying to wrap that around my head what that means. But anyway, so what we did as gardens, not only did we come together, 5 boroughs, gardens together collectively, but we also partner with religious organizations. We partner with housing organizations. We partnered with businesses and took our fight to the steps of City Hall. So when they said you can't fight City Hall, you darn can fight City Hall. And we did. And we got the air back then who was the Attorney General, was Elliot Spitzer, God bless his soul. Elliot Spitzer, who said what the mayor did was wrong, and we were able to save those 100 community gardens. Fast forward, again, people ask, well, how safe are these community gardens? And we tell people they are as safe as the present administration because these gardens are not preserved or protected. We have license agreement. So whenever there is a chance for a new mayor to come into the city, we have to make sure whether the candidates are, we have what is called a candidate forum, to make sure that community gardens are on the lips of politicians. Folks, we're in it's sort of a circumstance whereby there are more people moving into urban areas. Mm-hmm. That's happening, that's happening. And so then there's always going to be some sort of, way in between development and gardens. And so most people want affordable housing, and so how do we balance in such a way so that the next generation of people have a chance to participate and look at these community gardens?
Good. I want to, you mentioned the pivotal year of 1998, the Giuliani administration and the struggles. I want to drill down a little bit deeper to talk about the details of that struggle, starting, excuse the pun, at the grassroots, as we may. You have a lot of blighted areas that you're talking about, and there are vacant lots. It seems to me that from the get-go, somebody owns those. Somebody has title to that property, right? What are the types of, and there's no organism on earth that's more bureaucratic and more politicized than New York City. How did you, in effect, what were the obstacles that you faced at the beginning with regard to gaining acquisition of those plots? Seemingly they must have belonged to somebody prior to you putting seeds in the ground. How did you shift the ownership, the title, to whatever landlord owned that piece of property, to the community garden collective?
So most of the lots were city owned, and we just took them. You know, we was like, a lot of us did what's called guerrilla gardening, where we just did it. We just went around and threw seeds and plants, and we just took ownership of it. I mean, the city wasn't doing anything. So we just took ownership. And again, it's about ownership and power, and how that plays into this food system when it comes to land. When we have this conversation about land and land ownership, as an African American, many of us were told to go away from the land. A lot of us grew up, we look at our ancestors and look at our family background. A lot of transplanted New Yorkers came from the South, and so we were told, leave the land, come to the North for better jobs. And I think we lost, and I know, looking in retrospect, we lost when we left the land. Something that we lost when we left the land. This is why now we're trying to get back to the land. And so trying to find a better way of life by going away from the land, we lost our connection to food. We lost our narrative about our history around agriculture. And so what these community gardens are doing is to bring back that connection and having those narratives around food and equity and storytelling about, why was I brought here enslaved in chains, when a narrative around food for an African American has always been around slavery. Always. Slavery, boom, you brought here, you were here because you were unskilled labor, and no. We were brought here because of our knowledge of agriculture. That's taught in the textbook. We were brought here because we were skilled laborers. We were the first farmers when the colonies brought us here enslaved. And once you start taking that narrative and bringing the truth to the matter, then all of a sudden people are more empowered. It says, wait a second, that slavery thing isn't all true? We were brought here enslaved, but we were brought here because of our knowledge of agriculture. If you look at the climate in the South at that time, South Carolina and Georgia, it was the same climate that was in Africa. And so that marshy, swampy area where the colonies could not grow food, the Africans could grow food because they brought seeds in their hair, which was compatible to the climate. And so if you look at the food system, it was built on the back of enslaved people. And people made their wealth on that. And again, for me, I feel so proud about that narrative because for so long that was denied from me. The narrative always in relationship to food always brought up slavery. Never brought up the fact that as enslaved people, we were the ones to teach around crop rotation in irrigation. We were the ones that invented the hoe. We were the ones that for so long, again, that history has been denied from us. Now we're starting to understand our power comes from the soil. Comes from the soil and getting back to the soil. So these community gardens and these farms, the narrative now is like, you know what? If we're going to sort of fix a broken system around the food, then we need to start educating people about our relationship to food in terms of our history, in terms of our land.
Well, this is a perspective, I think, that is not only extremely important, but it's probably a very new way of thinking about the African American contribution, experience, background, and so forth in terms of racial struggles in the country. I wanted to get back to the movement and its applications and implications. How extensive now is the community garden movement in New York City, and how has it been, if you can talk maybe in psychological terms, of how has it been empowering to those people involved in it, and politically, what has been the spillover effect? How has it, in effect, sort of segued into the broader justice movement around food, agriculture, and so on, if you can?
Like I said, most of these community gardens are in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And if you look at the food system within those neighborhoods, we have three systems, and I call them my triangle system, my pyramid system, I call. We got three because I'm going to sort of step back because people use the term food deserts. How many of you heard that term, food deserts? Yeah. So I want you to say food deserts for me. That's the last time you're going to use that term because I coined the term food apartheid. Ooh. And the reason why I coined the term food apartheid instead of food desert, because first of all, the people in the desert will tell you, we got food. And so what the term food desert has been is a political briefing construct. It has been used to define people in neighborhoods who lack the access to a grocery store or to healthy food and to food. And the fact is, I got on the phone, I'm calling my friends, in Detroit and Philly and Oakland and Baltimore. I'm saying, what's this food desert thing? Because that's a term we don't use in the hood. And that's a term that's used in reference to collecting data. But behind the data and people checking off are people's lives. And so for me, using the term food apartheid brings in the conversation about race and economics and demographics that we need to have. And so, like I said, by using the word food apartheid, I'm bringing into this food system that I see, which is the fast food, the junk food, and the food that was supposed to revolutionize the food economy, the processed food, namely the TV dinner. And so if you break it down into what is happening in the food system, those are the three foods that we have because we are in these United States of America where we grow enough food. We waste enough food. Why isn't food that we need going back to the people that need it the most? So for me, looking at the food system in my neighborhood and a lot of impoverished neighborhoods, I tell people it's a form of genocide. It's a form of genocide because we know what the problem is, folks. You know it. You know that the unhealthy, cheap food go into poor neighborhoods and the good, healthy food go into rich neighborhoods. We know that. It's not, it's not like rocket science. We know as a result of this food, we're having diet-related diseases. I live in the Bronx, the boogie down Bronx. Out of 62 counties in New York State, the Bronx ranks 62 as the most unhealthiest county in New York State. We've been on that for the last 3 years. And so when I say that when people say that the food system is broken, it needs to be fixed, folks, I am tired of statistics. I am tired of people because we know, you know, I know where bad food goes, where good food goes. And so now for me, I don't want to hear about statistics anymore. Let's talk about action. Let's talk what needs to happen. And so what these community gardens are trying to do is like, hey, we ain't got healthy food. We don't have culturally appropriate food. So then, you know what, we gotta try and grow our own food. Now, community gardens are not growing enough food to feed the hundreds of families. But what they are doing is starting to have that conversation of what good food looks like, what it tastes like. Starting to have that conversation, that education around what is possible. But again, you know what? I tell people, you know, anytime you are growing land in a municipality, it has political consequences. And every time you try to get yourself and try to do something more in the gardens, there's always red tape. For example, 16 years ago, our community garden collective in the Bronx decided we want to do a farmer's market. Great idea, right? Farmer's market. So the first thing that we did, what a lot of people don't do, is that we asked our community if they wanted. Because now farmers markets and CSAs, they're everywhere. And then they said, you know, build it, they will come. Build it, they ain't gonna come if they don't feel vested in it. And so even with community gardens, there are a lot of people, you know what, I'm gonna put a community garden, people with wealth, I'm gonna go in these neighborhoods and put a community garden, I'm gonna do a CSA, I'm going to do a farmer's market, and it's like, but they're not coming. Well, if it doesn't come from the community, they are not gonna support it. So what we did was we asked the community, y'all want a farmer's market here? How about you gotta travel to get good food? And so having a farmer's market, they said yes. Then going to a political person trying to find a spot. So once we got this idea of doing a farmer's market run by community gardens, unheard of, run by community gardens, because we felt there was a need to not only grow food, but also partner with rural farmers to bring fresh, healthy food into our neighborhood.
Okay, I want to move on from there.
Yeah,
That's, I think, an exceedingly relevant way to segue into the larger picture. Let me start this way. I'm not a conspiratorialist, but I've read Michael Pollan, who's also won the James Beard Award with you, and he does think that there actually is a conspiracy by agribusiness, basically to produce food that gets people addicted to sugar, through corn syrup, and so on and so forth. Lots of bad eating habits are generated on the envelope profits of the agribusinesses. And I'm wondering, your movement starts locally, it's expanding, it has clearly a powerful political dimension. Are you able to use this movement as a focus to basically take on the very large issues of agribusiness and how it determines what people across the board in this country actually consume? That's a big question.
That's a big question. That's a difficult question, because it's not only the community gardens, it's the small farmers that are having a challenge with these big agro-businesses, and the fact that we still have a food system whereby certain foods, you know, are subsidized. High fructose corn syrup, and corn is still subsidized, and still that food is coming into our neighborhoods. And this is why, you know, I think education is the key now. It's like pulling off the blinders now. Getting people now to be more active locally, because the federal government, they got their problems. And so really educating people locally to start reading labels. If you are eating something, it's a perfect example. You're eating a blueberry jorge, and there are like 20 different ingredients, and there's no blueberry, something wrong with that. You're drinking a grape soda, and where is the grape in the soda? And so starting having those conversations about reading labels, because if you can't pronounce it, you shouldn't be eating it. You know? And then also making people understand the power that they have in that mighty dollar. Getting people to stop buying stuff. Stop buying until you demand change. And again, educating people locally, especially people who are at a disadvantage because they don't have, you know, the monetary power, they don't have wealth. But at a local level, educating people to, demand change with that almighty dollar.
Right. Let me ask you a question. You're an African-American woman who's worked primarily, clearly focused in African-American communities. Everybody has to eat, whether you're white or black or whatever. The health issue in this country around eating is something that has obviously affects not only people of color, but also everyone across the board. It seems to me that this might be an issue as it evolves, where there's an opportunity for cross-racial coalitions. There's a great deal, it's not only race, it's also class. I've traveled through Appalachia, you go through central Pennsylvania, where we have prevailingly white communities. These people do not look like they're in good shape, man. The diabetes, the sodium in these packaged foods, the fast food that they go to, it's functioning to a great degree of class and not only of race. It intersects, it's intersectional. I'm wondering, is there an opportunity here, do you think, for developing around food, around health issues in terms of food and the broken system, whether there's an opportunity for interracial coalitions and so forth?
There's always, poverty has no face. It's white, black, urban, rural. But we need to talk about race, and we don't talk about race in the context of privilege and power. And so that's where we need to start having that conversations. Why is there based on race and based on demographics, and start having that conversation before we can even think about really interracial conversation. We have to be cognizant of the fact that the food system is based on the capitalistic, white supremacist system dominated by white males. Here alone, 55,000 white farmers, 150 black farmers. So we need to talk about the inequities in order for us to move forward. Yes, we know in Appalachia, yes, we know there are whites that have the same problem, but also we know that it's whites that have more privilege. And so we need to sort of sit back, and we are afraid to talk about race. Even though people, they don't want to hear, but as long as I got every breath in my body, because I'm still waiting for my 40 acres and a mule. Yeah. Because if we had our 40 acres and a mule, we wouldn't be sitting down having this conversation. Because wealth would have been spread amongst all of us. And we would not have this conversation that we're having now. So we need to start having this conversation about where is the wealth? Right. Where's the wealth in this in this system? And it's getting worse, y'all. The Guardian just put out an article that by 2053, I was born in 1954, but 2053 I'll be 99. If I'm here, God help me. But they're saying that the wealth in the black community be non-existent. Non-existent. And so we need to talk, we need to have those hard conversations. We need to have a hard conversation in all communities that are poor, black or white. We need to have those conversations because, again, I have to say this over and over, like I'm going to knock my head against some wood. We live in the greatest country in the world. We grow enough food. We waste enough food. Why isn't it getting down to the people that need it the most? What are the barriers? And those are the barriers that I'm bringing up to the forefront. Right.
Lots of questions I could ask. Let me ask one more because people from the audience, I'm sure, have questions. Let me try to end on a positive note. Are you in effect hopeful in the long range? And what is your ultimate you sort of utopian vision? You seem to imply it when you get into questions of wealth, equity, and so on and so forth. What is your vision? What is your ultimate vision with regard to food justice? And are you hopeful as a result of the work you've done and what you see?
I'm hopeful. I gotta be hopeful. Because I see how the politics are changing. I see this influx of youth. The youth movement. I was a product of the 60s. Mm-hmm. Make love, not war. We're gonna change the world. Everybody's gonna live in harmony. What happened to us? What happened to us? We're worse off now than ever. 60 people. And so for me, I see the twinkle in young people's eyes. I see young people coming to me and say, I want to farm. 20 years ago, I've never heard that. You know, I want to grow things. I want to be part of a political system to change and offering those words. So yes, I feel hopeful. But what I also feel is in my community is that one day that the people in my community, I tell people, give us three things: opportunity, capital, land, or a business. Come into my community, not about soup kitchen, food pantry, welfare. Come into my community and start talking about financial literacy, entrepreneurship, investment. That's like talk in our community. That's like talk in our community. Because I wake up wanting to see people in my community owning businesses. Why is this such gentrification? Why do I have to see outside people coming and pushing my people out? We can do cafes. We know how to do breweries. And yet outsiders come in, push people who have been there for so long. And you can't tell me it's not based on race and economics. Because when you have one set of a race coming in pushing people that have been there for so long and you're not cognizant of that, that's why we need to have these conversations. We need to have these conversations. And so for me, my ideal is that the people in my community, they're owning the stores. They're owning the businesses. And so people who are once deemed powerless now become powerful. That's what I dream each and every day about my
Isn't
community.
that great? Let's extend our gratitude to Chuman. Yeah.
Hi.
I'm one of those people who kill for good tomatoes, so I'm.
Yeah.
But my question is,
I can hear you. I
It's okay.
I can hear you, right. You're a New Yorker.
My question is, have you seen or do you know anything about what Michelle Obama's beautiful community garden? What happened to it?
Donald Trump.
I
We
was
didn't have to
so, huh?
Trump. We have, I mean, but she.
I was so impressed with her attitude about children and the garden and everything she was doing. And I feel like, you know, you've been talking to her, so could you tell us a little bit about her movement and also how you've been working with her?
Well, so let me just get this straight now. I just went got an award and said, "Hi, Michelle, how you doing? Come to the Bronx for see me." I ain't been working with her. So she had a program, the Let's Move program. It was really getting young people out into exercise and also into gardening, which you would think that it would continue under the present administration. So yeah. But thank you,
Do you know
Michelle.
if the garden has gone fallow or?
I don't know because no one talks about it.
Yeah, I was just, because I was so
Yeah.
impressed with how you were doing that.
Hello.
Hi.
I am one of the people who did get my hands dirty with farming. I volunteered at the demonstration garden at the Queens Botanical Gardens, and I worked with people from farm school. And I know that you have business with farm school. We know about that. Could you please tell the people about farm school? Thank you.
Yes, so farm school was started, I guess, about 5 years ago. Okay, so a lot of us went to this program out in Santa Cruz called CASPIS, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food System. 6 months living in a tent, learning how to grow organically. And when we came back, we said, you know, a lot of people can't go there. You know, what's out there for ordinary people to learn about growing food and learn about food and social justice? So 40 of us were in a room, not only people from CASPIS, but it was Just Food, it was Why Hunger, it was the Horticulture Society, Green Thumb, Grow NYC. Everyone left their egos at the door to come up with a curriculum that we could start teaching people basic around urban agriculture, but through a food justice lens. And it's been remarkable how, and there's no age, I mean, you have to be 18, but you can go from 18 to 90. Tuition's on a sliding scale. And it's so great how to see so many people that go through farm school not only learn about growing food, but learn about the reason why they're growing food, and also what is it they're going to do once they leave farm school. What's the difference that they're going to make? I happen to teach advocacy, so you know by the time they leave, they got projects and actions that they have to fulfill. So thank you so much for the plug for farm school. Very good.
Thank you so much for everything. So we talk about privilege, and you talk about using our money. Is there a way that we can use our money to buy food that is grown by Black farmers?
I love that. See, because I'm a Black farmer. And so again, and that's, you know what, and that's what people, especially community color are asking for. You know, there are not many of us. There are not many of us that are out there. I remember last year I was at a conference. I'm not getting emotional. Let me try not to get emotional. And I had finished speaking, and this woman with her 7-year-old come running, Miss Washington, I know you have to go. Would you mind taking a picture with my daughter? So I said, yeah, African American. And she says, you know what my daughter said to me? She says, when she grows up, she wants to be a farmer. Mm. And that thing went through me because there has not, to even hear that a child, a 7-year-old child, wants to grow up to be a farmer. And so your question is a good point. Again, we need to talk, again, the food system. 59,000 white farmers, 150 Black farmers. So we need to sort of have that conversation about how do we get more people of color in terms of giving them the opportunity, because the hindrance for all farmers is land. Land is, and now what I'm concerned about is this whole, I'm going to open Pandora's box. I can't talk about this because it's another conversation, marijuana and hemp. Because a lot of farmers, I mean, to be a farmer, it's labor intensive and it's a lot in terms of trying to make money. And so now hemp and marijuana is on the scene. And it's a way for farmers to start making, you know, good profit, but you don't want it to be at the expense of growing food.
Mm. Okay, let's take 2 more questions. One here. Yeah, okay.
Fascinating discussion. I live in Riverdale, and
Are you still part of the
a lot of
Bronx?
time. Yeah, I taught at PS24 over by the Bronx Zoo years back. So I crossed the Bronx from Riverdale and back, and yeah, so much more needs to be done. I completely sympathize and appreciate your efforts. Say this year, what 3 things would you like to see maybe the mayor's office or the governor's office do if you could have your wish?
That's an excellent question, because I've already had a meeting with my council person, who is Richard Torres. I said, and I don't want to, you know, you're going to do that. I just happened to call him up and said, you know, I need to have a meeting with you because I want to find out what your views are, and I want you to listen to what my views are. So I was telling him about the food system. I asked him, I said, can you at least talk about, introduce a conversation on or a bill to do zoning, change zoning. Why do I have to see every block a fast food restaurant? Change the zoning which will prohibit the amount of fast food restaurants within a 10-block radius. And then also put an incentive to bring in healthy food options. My neighborhood, there's not a vegan restaurant, there's not a vegetarian restaurant, and, you know, I gotta sort of have a, you know, check on him, because I did that, you know, in the beginning of January. That's what I'm asking. I'm asking that. I'm asking zoning, why block after block after block after block, there's a fast food restaurant in low-income neighborhoods. And where wealthy neighborhoods, you gotta drive. And so do zoning to, and I'm not saying, you know, people want a McDonald's or Wendy or something. I'm not trying to take business away from people. I'm just trying to limit the amount. When you know that these businesses are killing us. So zoning, that's my big thing. Zoning, limit the amount of fast food restaurants within a certain radius. Because now, let me tell you what's happening. It's a little secret. Because what's now popping up along the fast food restaurants It used to be the cigarettes and the alcohol are the drugstores. On every corner, the fast, because that's how we treat our illnesses. Huh, why should we bring healthy food when you can take a pill, take insulin? So that's what's happening. So if the remedy is put more drugstores so you can take more medications to help deal with your illness. More money, always on the treatment, not enough on prevention.
Right. Well, those drugstores also sell a lot of junk food too. Okay, one last question, and then we'll.
Yeah, I noticed in my neighborhood, Amsterdam Avenue on the Upper West Side, there's a lot of salad restaurants opening up, and a lot of people are attracted to that vegan lifestyle, you know. But you mentioned in your neighborhood there's no vegan. And there's a lot of salad bars around there, but also there's McDonald's right on the corner of 71st and Amsterdam on Broadway.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go there because it's cheap and it's, you get a quick meal, a burger or something.
Right.
But it's not, like you said, it's a class divide. It's a class divide. The kids with a little more money, they go to the vegan stores and they buy a nice salad for themselves, and the kids with less money, they come out of school, they go to McDonald's, there's a pizza place right next to it, and that's it. They want to eat, you know.
And it's
It's
big,
money. I think it's a money factor.
and these big ag businesses, let me tell y'all something. It's about marketing and advertising. And guess what's the number one consumer? Children. $1 billion business. $1 billion business because what do? Mommy, Dad, buy me the Happy Meal with the toy. Want to go to McDonald's. So the concentration is on children. And this is why in this movement of community gardens and growing food, we need to really, and also the absurd of school gardens, it's the children that we need to focus on. We need help.
Right. Let me just say, before we end, I find your movement and you so compelling that I think it really encourages us, the New York Ethical Society, to begin to develop coalitions. With your work, we have a phenomenal meeting house we can lend you for your meetings and so forth. You're organizing, that's the least we could do. And right, there you go. And hopefully we can develop, I'm looking at mine, but we should, so either in our environmental work, develop some actual grassroots coalition work with this. Okay, again, let's extend our gratitude.